friends, my name is Rob and I'm so keen to be opening up the book of Exodus with you today. Well, we've often said God is faithful. God is faithful. Maybe you've said it in your own lives. God is faithful. We normally say that phrase, God is faithful, when we're kind of going through a rough patch in our lives, but we feel like we made it through the other side okay, and so we say God is faithful. Or we're going through a rough time, and in the midst of it, we feel like we're kind of doing okay, and so we can say, God is faithful. I'm having a hard time, but God is faithful. But if things really start to go downhill or completely spiral out of control, we can sometimes feel like maybe God isn't being faithful. Maybe he's even let us down. Now, I wonder if you've ever felt like that maybe God has let you down, or maybe he could be being a little bit more faithful to you in the circumstance that you're in. Well, in those times, I think the big question that we're really asking is, how faithful is God? How faithful is he? I mean, is he faithful to my needs, to my expectations, to my wants? What do I actually hold him faithful to? Well, we're going to see as we open up the book of Exodus that God is 100% faithful. 100% faithful to his promises. And we're going to see why that is actually really good for us. Well, I don't know what you might know about the book of Exodus, whether maybe you've seen some of the movies like The Prince of Egypt or Exodus, God and Kings. Now, these movies, they got some really good parts in them, but none quite capture what's really going on in Exodus. Exodus is a mountain peak part of the Bible, literally. It's about God honoring his promise to redeem a people for himself. He rescues them out of captivity under harsh slavery. He captivates them by his grace and power, and he transforms them into a nation that will truly captivate the world. But the question is, what were those promises? What were those promises? Well, come back with me all the way to Genesis, one book before, where God made promises to an old man named Abraham, some pretty significant promises. And check this out with me. Genesis 12, verse 1 to 3, he said this. The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." A whole new land of their own, a great nation, blessed, and a blessing to the world. But watch out if you curse this family. Again, a few chapters on in Genesis 15, God gets a little bit more specific about what things might look like. Check this out in 15, verse 12 to 16. He says, "As the sun was setting, Abraham fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, 'Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure." Very specific. And if you remember back to when we looked at Genesis over a year ago, maybe you weren't with us, things were looking up for Israel. One of Abraham's great-grandsons, Joseph, had become the most powerful man in Egypt next to Pharaoh. And he'd then brought his whole family up from the land of Canaan, the land that Abraham had been promised, to live in Egypt, and they were prospering there. And for over 200 years, things were going well until there was a change of guard, and what Joseph did for Egypt in the famine was completely forgotten. Look with me at verse 6 to 10 in Exodus chapter 1. "Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died, but the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. 'Look,' he said to his people, 'the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, we will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. Now, this new Pharaoh is either a paranoid, insecure leader, or he's not dumb. He knows that if this group of people keep growing, they're going to lose their reign pretty soon. And so he comes down really hard. Look at verse 11 to 13. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramesses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. And so the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites, and they worked them ruthlessly. If God is behind it, you cannot stop it. But Pharaoh keeps trying. In verses 15 and 16, we see that he orders the Hebrew midwives, the Israelites, to kill every newborn boy right on the delivery table as they come out. To kill their own people, their own relatives. But these women, they knew who to fear more than Pharaoh. And in spite of his command, in spite of what he might even do to them, they honor God and they let the boys live. It's a very courageous decision. Well, Pharaoh's not happy, and he calls the women to account, but God protects them, and he even honors them, and the people of Israel continue to multiply. And so Pharaoh takes it even a step further and commands his own people to throw every newborn boy into the Nile. It is absolutely horrific. It's really the ugliest side of the sin of human pride and arrogance. And it wasn't only then, we still see it today. Think of places like what's happening in Ukraine and a little while ago in Iraq, just a complete disregard for the importance and value of life. And so here we are, Israel, Abraham's descendants, growing into a great nation, but still living in harsh slavery. Is God faithful? I mean, it's been 400 years, like he said, but things only seem to be looking worse. Has God forgotten them? I mean, would they be feeling like God is faithful? Would they be able to say, God is faithful? Well, in chapter 2, we meet some more courageous women, and we see how God does keep his promises, but not in spite of reality. And this is actually really helpful for us. Have a look with me at verse 1 to 4. It says, Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Now, it's easy to read over that, but I just cannot imagine how difficult this would have been for them. Our little daughter, our third child, is 3 months old, just the same age as Moses would have been at this point. This is a very courageous mum, disobeying Pharaoh, trying to protect this boy, and a courageous sister, standing watching on, seeing what might happen. I mean, if she gets caught, she's going to be in trouble. And then we actually meet another courageous woman, but not a Hebrew, Pharaoh's own daughter. Have a look at verse 5 and 6. Look what happens. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave over to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. Now, surely she knows what's been going on. I mean, she knows what her dad's been doing. She knows that this baby is not supposed to be alive. But she's obviously more human than her dad is, and maybe she's feeling the injustice and the insanity of it all. And she's there seeing this crying baby and feels sorry for him. And then, I don't know if this is super silly or super brave, but the sister goes over and offers to find somebody to keep him alive. You kind of feel like, whoa, Miriam, shh, get back behind the reeds. Like, talk about stepping out in faith. I reckon we could take a lesson from Miriam here. They say people are far more likely to say yes to an invitation to church or an invitation to talk about God than Christians are willing to ask them. I mean, we should definitely learn from Miriam's optimism here. Just go for it. Trust God. But Pharaoh's daughter agrees, and little Moses ends up back with his own mother to be weaned. And not only that, but Pharaoh's daughter is going to pay her to do it. It's crazy. God is making sure that this little bub survives, and he's even getting his enemies to pay for it to happen. Now, once he's weaned, she takes him back to Pharaoh's daughter. He's probably, say, between 3 and 5 here. And she adopts him as her own. She gives him the name Moses, which means drawn from the water. Now, everything about this story so far is setting up Moses to be a hero. Now, in the ancient Near East, around that place, around that time, and even well before this, there were some actually really similar stories to this story we're hearing today. Actually, almost exactly the same. A baby was born, put into the Nile or put into the river, drawn out by somebody really powerful, and became a powerful king to reign over nations and did amazing things. Anyone in this context, hearing this story, kind of thinking about this scenario, would immediately be thinking, this is a hero in the making. And that's actually how God has set up this story. It's kind of like when you're watching a movie or reading a new book, and the opening scene, you see all the things happening and you go, I know where this is going. I've seen this scene before. This is that classic scene. I know what's going to happen. But there's actually a twist in this story. It begins with these big expectations of little Moses, but it quickly goes downhill. What happens? Well, Moses grows up in the palace, and he looks out on his own people who are still under harsh slavery, and he sees one of them getting beaten by an Egyptian, so he goes out to help, and he actually kills the Egyptian soldier. Bad move. And so he tries to hide him, but maybe he spent too long in the palace and he's got soft palace hands because he doesn't do a great job, and it doesn't work. The next day, possibly feeling all macho, he sees a fight happening between 2 Hebrew people, 2 of his own people, and he goes out to sort it out, but they taunt him saying, what are you going to do? You're going to kill us like you killed that Egyptian? And Moses then realizes this news has got out. Even Pharaoh's heard of it, and instead of being a hero, Moses ends up fleeing for his life as a fugitive. He travels about 300 miles from there to Midian, and he finds himself sitting by a well, tired, alone, probably full of doubt and despair. But if you know anything about what happens by wells in the Bible, this is another story cue for those who have been reading along. A few ladies turn up, and Moses finds himself meeting his wife, moving in with her father, having a son, and gives him the name Gershom, which means, Exodus 2:22, I have become a foreigner in a foreign land. Now, I don't know what your name means, but you got to feel sorry for some of the kids in the Bible. I mean, they just get given such strange names. And so life for Moses kind of comes to nothing. So much for a hero beginning. He's ended up a bit of a failure. Yeah, he's got a family, but different from how he began. But then we read this at the end of chapter 2, verse 23 to 25. During that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. You see, God is the real hero of this story. The God who made promises to Abraham to rescue his people and bless the world. He hears the cry of his people. He remembers his promise. He looks down upon them with compassion. I mean, Moses cared, but he was incapable. God is able to act. It's kind of like the camera zooms out from Moses, blurs Moses out, and there behind him is God, who's the true hero of this story. Now, Moses will be a critical part of this story, but he is not the hero. Man is not the hero, but God is. And you see here, if Israel were wondering, Is God faithful? Is God faithful to us? Has he let us down? The answer is yes, he is faithful. He is faithful. He's faithful to his promises. He will come through, but not in spite of reality. What does that mean? I mean, he said that they would be slaves in a foreign land for 400 years, and they were. He never said that they would have an easy ride and be free from hardship. He also was waiting, as he promised, that the sin of the Amorites hadn't reached its full measure yet. There was something else going on, like he said in Genesis 15. There's more going on than just Israel's scenario. God's plans include them, but they're also bigger than them. His promises are for them, but they're also bigger than them. God is faithful to his promises, but not despite reality, not in spite of the everyday mess of this world. You see, even though God had promised to rescue his people, he sees his plans through in the midst of the mess of this world. Now, have a think with me. Think of Moses, right? God had protected him and guided him into the palace to survive, because he had a plan for him, which we're going to see over the coming weeks what that plan was. But he didn't spare him from what was to come. Now, God let Moses journey through the pain of learning who he himself was, running away from his homeland and ending up homeless, and then finding a whole new land in another place, coming to terms with his own hopelessness, and before calling him back into action to go to Pharaoh to set his people free. God was keeping his promises, but working them out in reality. See, Moses still had to go to Pharaoh. He himself struggled to speak, and so he had to get his brother to go with him to speak for him. He faced sneers and rejection from his own people as they rejected him. They didn't trust him. They didn't believe him. God didn't just call Moses and give him this super suit, this full of metal kind of, nothing bad will happen to you, give him a bunch of superpowers and say, go out there and you're going to just do everything awesome. No, he sent him in his frail state and said, trust me. Moses and all Israel had to learn that God alone was powerful to save, and that it was going to happen in reality as they learned to trust him and obey him through those hardships. And God did come through. And the same is true for us in Jesus. God is faithful to us in Jesus, but they come to us in reality. You see, Jesus didn't just float down from heaven and stay far off up in the sky and kind of look down and say, right, you're saved and you're saved and you're saved. I'm not going to come down into the mess, but I'm just going to make everything okay and make you perfect right now. No, he entered into the mess. He became one of us and lived among us 33 long years. His family had to leave home to escape their home, to escape Herod, who was trying to put Jesus to death, just like Moses. Just like Moses, he also faced the rejection from his own people as they didn't believe him and they rejected him. And eventually he was strung up on the cross by his enemies and died a real, painful death to fulfill God's promise to Abraham that we would be blessed through him. For asking that question, how faithful is God? Is he faithful enough? On the cross, Jesus cried out, God, why have you forsaken me? So that I would know a reality where I would never have to say that. So that you would know that reality. God has never forsaken us. He experienced in his body on the cross what we really deserved, so that we can truly say, he has never let me down. Now that is a grace that really captivates. God is faithful. He is faithful, but not to my expectations for a cruisy life. God is faithful, but not to my preferences for minimal pain in life and things going the way I expect and want them to. God never promised that we would have an easy life protected from all the hardships and pain. He actually promised the exact opposite of that. Have a look at John 16:33, where Jesus says to his followers, in this life you will have trouble. But take heart, have comfort. I have overcome the world. You see, in the midst of our reality, He is faithful to his promise that he is for us, that he is with us, that he will guide us through life, not despite reality, not despite the mess, but in the midst of the mess of life. Now, what difference does that make to us, knowing that God is faithful? What does it mean for us? Well, it means this, that we don't have to fall into deep despair. When life turns completely upside down, knowing that God keeps his promise, that he comes through, that keeps us from falling into a place of despair. No matter how rough things get, when we feel that temptation to say, God is not faithful, God has let me down, God has forsaken me, he's left me. No, Jesus has come. He has died. He has risen. He is coming back. God is faithful. He has a plan. He is good. He is with me. I can still have hope in the midst of this. Now, knowing that God is faithful doesn't take away the real pain of life that we experience, but it gives us in the midst of it a deep comfort, a certain hope that this is not the end, that God is still with me and he's not done with me yet, that God's plans are bigger than me and bigger than this. And it's often the case that it takes those hard times before we truly experience that comfort and that hope from God. Minister Tim Keller, he put it this way. He says, "It is only when you reach the very bottom, when everything falls apart, when all your schemes and resources are broken and exhausted, that you are finally open to learn how to completely depend on God." God is the true hero. That's what Moses needed to happen. That's the state that Israel found themselves in. And I wonder for you, have you been there? Maybe you're there right now, questioning God's goodness, questioning his love, his faithfulness, tempted to say he's not faithful, tempted to pull away from God. Well, the encouragement from today's passage is lean into God, trust his promises, receive his comfort in the midst of your reality, whatever it is that you're facing. This book of Exodus is going to encourage and challenge all of us this term to see a bigger God, to look beyond ourselves, to look beyond our pain, beyond our limitations, to see a big God who knows exactly what he's doing. A God who has heard our cries, who remembers his promise, who looks upon us with compassion, who has given us his own Son and captivated us by his grace. He is a good God and worthy to be trusted. Why don't you pray with me today? Oh God, we are so thankful that you show us how big and awesome and faithful you are. And there are times, Lord, when we feel like we've hit rock bottom, when we feel like you've left us, where we can't feel like you are being faithful right now. And we ask in those times that you would remind us of who you are and what you've done and on the truth of your promises. That Jesus has come, has died, has risen, will come, is with us, is for us, and is working on us and through us, even in the midst of our pain and reality. And we ask this, that we would see the awesomeness of how you work, that we would know the true comfort that comes from knowing you, and that you would protect us from falling into a place of despair. And so we thank you for this word, and we look forward to the way you'll challenge us and work through us as we enter the book of Exodus. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
To be satisfied, vain and empty, until the moment you rescued me and your love filled me. My soul sings, now my soul sings. What blessed assurance found in you. we share.